The September air carried that uneasy balance of warmth fading into cold, the kind of weather that feels like a hand letting go of yours. I stepped out of the cab, duffel bag on one shoulder, my discharge papers tucked inside like they were worth more than gold. 25 years in uniform had taught me how to fight wars in shadows, how to dismantle cyber networks designed to topple nations. But none of that training mattered now, because here I was on the cracked sidewalk outside the house my grandfather had built, feeling like a trespasser. The porch light above me flickered. Once that glow meant safety, the beacon that told me I was home. Tonight it felt like surveillance, cold and unwelcome. My boots crunched against gravel as I stared at the windows, each one glowing faintly amber. From the outside it looked like nothing had changed. But deep down I knew everything had. I pressed the buzzer. My sister Delilah's voice came through, flat as stone. "Who is it?" "It's me, Tamzen." The silence that followed stretched too long, sharp enough to cut. Finally, the door opened a crack and she appeared at the top of the stairs. She didn't smile, didn't even look me over with curiosity. Her hand was already on her phone. "You can't just show up here," she snapped. "This isn't your home anymore. You left, you disappeared." The words hit harder than any battlefield explosion. "I just came back from service," I managed, my throat tightened. "I thought maybe I could see Mom, Dad." Her eyes narrowed, a stranger's glare carved into the face of my sister. "They don't want to see you, neither do I, and if you don't leave, I'm calling the police." It wasn't a bluff. The faint tremble in her hand wasn't fear, it was readiness. She was already dialing. I stood there frozen, boots rooted to the porch I had once raced across as a kid. The same porch where Grandpa taught me Morse code with a flashlight, where Mom used to wait with Coco on snow days. And now I was the intruder. Minutes later, red and blue lights cut across the street. A cruiser rolled up, quiet but heavy. One officer stepped out, young, crisp uniform. The other older, with a buzz cut that told me he had worn the same uniform I once did. He looked at me, and for a moment recognition flickered. "Lieutenant Colonel Lockach?" he asked. I nodded, but it didn't matter. The younger officer's voice was firm. "This property belongs to Delilah Thatcher and Richard Lockach. There's no record of you having legal access." The gate closed. Just like that, the battle had shifted. I wasn't facing foreign enemies this time. I was facing blood. And deep in my chest, I knew I wouldn't lose. That night, I didn't drive away. I parked 2 blocks down, engine off, coat zipped up to my chin. The streetlights painted faint halos across the pavement. And there it was, my grandfather's house, looming like a ghost at the end of the lane. A crooked sign on the front lawn caught my eye, "For sale, private listing." I stared until the words blurred and something inside me cracked. Not in combat, not when I'd lost soldiers overseas, not even when I came home to an empty apartment years ago, but here, outside the home that raised me. I clenched my fists. They thought they could erase me with a piece of paper. A signature, a deed. They didn't know me at all, because I wasn't built for surrender. Episode 2, The Door That Wouldn't Open. Morning didn't feel like a beginning, it felt like a spotlight. The street woke up slow, delivery vans, a jogger with a neon leash, sprinklers misting what used to be my grandmother's lawn. I was still in the car 2 blocks down, coffee gone cold, uniform jacket folded beside me like I couldn't decide whether to wear my past or hide it. At 8:07, the front door opened. Delilah stepped out with a realtor I didn't recognize. Sharp bob, sharper heels, tablet under her arm like a badge. They spoke in the kind of whispers meant to be seen. The realtor pointed at the porch, the roofline, the flower beds where hydrangeas used to glow like paper lanterns. Delilah nodded as if she'd curated the entire house herself, not inherited the bones of it. I didn't go to them. I made them come to me. I walked the 2 blocks like I belonged on that sidewalk because I did. The realtor's smile calcified when she saw me. Delilah didn't bother pretending. "We're done with this," she said, hands on hips. "You made a scene last night, don't make another one. You called the police on your sister," I said. "I think we're past scenes." The realtor shifted, professional antennae sparking. "Ms. Thatcher, should I?" "I've got it," Delilah cut in. Then to me, "You need to leave. There's a private showing at 9. "Private?" I looked at the sign. "On our grandfather's house. On my property," she said, voice cooling. "Which Dad and I legally own." Something low and mean tightened in my gut. "You want to show me the deed?" She didn't flinch. That rattled me more than a slap would have. She pulled a folded copy from her tote like she'd been rehearsing this. The paper hit my palm with the weight of a verdict. At the top, Raven Crest Holdings, LLC. Below it, a clean chain transfer, notarized, recorded. And there it was, my name, not as owner, as seller. I kept my face still. My hands learned that steadiness in rooms where panic gets people killed. I didn't sign this, I said. You signed away everything years ago when you chose deployments over family, Delilah replied. The realtor pretended to check an email. Dad tried to tell you, Mom tried, you disappeared. I didn't argue with someone rewriting my history in bullet points. That's how you lose yourself, defending every line when the whole page is a lie. Where's Dad? I asked. Her jaw shifted. Busy. With what? Accounting the guilt. Therapy would be good for you, Tam, she said softly, a dagger wrapped in a throw blanket. There's a lot you haven't processed. The realtor finally found her voice. We do need the driveway clear for the photographer. Photographer, the word landed like gravel in my mouth. I handed the paper back. You found a notary willing to play God. Good for you. Delilah rolled her eyes. You always did think everything was a conspiracy. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a storm I could outshout. This was water rising under the floorboards, quiet, steady, engineered. You don't argue with a flood, you get to higher ground and you start reading the map. Enjoy your showing, I said, turning. I'll be back. Please don't, she called after me. For your sake. I kept walking. 2 houses down, Mrs. Keating, the neighbor with the lemon tree and an Olympic-level talent for gentle eavesdropping, was pruning roses. She didn't wave. She lowered her shears like a flag. Morning, Colonel, she said, voice low. You heard. I heard what they wanted me to, she said. And I saw what I saw. She glanced toward the alley. Trucks late, men who don't wear neighborhood shoes. Since when? A while. She handed me a business card, they're realtors. They gave me this in case I knew anyone discreet. I told them my friends talk. A laugh escaped me, quick and brittle. Thanks, sugar, she said, Old South softness wrapping steel. Don't let them talk you out of your name. I tucked the card into my pocket like a small prayer and kept moving. I didn't have a plan yet. What I had was a list. County recorder, utility records, notary license checks. If Raven Crest was a shell, it had seams. I grabbed a burner coffee at a strip mall cafe and slid into a back booth with my notebook. The pen moved on its own, dates, names, numbers, tiny arrows that only make sense to people who have lived too long in command rooms. I wrote deed chain and circled it twice. Will original, notary name, title freeze, utility spikes, alley cams. My pulse slowed. This was the language I speak when everything else drowns. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail and hit play. A man's voice, warm like tea gone cold. MS. Lockach, this is Officer Greer. We met last night. Off the record, check the recording clerk's log from 3 months ago. There was an expedited filing on your parcel. That doesn't happen without a nudge. Be careful who you trust. Hung up, no number to call back. I stared out at the parking lot. A woman wrestled a stroller into a trunk, hair in a messy bun, life moving in a straight line mine had never found. I wasn't jealous. I was anchored by the ordinary stubbornness of people who don't have to fight for their names. At 10:12, a text arrived. Dad, busy at the office. Don't come by, no punctuation. My father loved periods. When he didn't use them, it meant hurry or hide. I typed, did you sign anything with Raven Crest? I watched the 3 dots appear. Disappear. His reply, you've been gone a long time. Things change. Not an answer, a smoke bomb. I closed my eyes and let the small grief pass through of a daughter who wasn't going to get a hug on the porch she grew up on. Then I did what the job taught me. I compartmentalized. By noon, I was at the county building, bad coffee in one hand, numbered ticket in the other. Plexiglass. Fluorescent lights, a clock that ticked like a metronome for impatience. When C-213 flashed, I stepped forward. I need the full chain of title for 1,450 Winmere, I said, sliding my ID under the slot. And the notary journal for any deed transfers in the last year. The clerk, gray sweater, kind eyes that hid a lifetime of bureaucracy, raised an eyebrow. You a lawyer? Just someone who reads paperwork for a living. He chuckled, that your living or your survival. Today, both. He tapped keys. Expedited filing. Rare. Notary appears on a lot of DMV documents too. His voice went flat, professional. You'll need to file a public records request for the journal. Could take a while. I can wait, I said, even though I couldn't. He slid a thin stack to me. Start here, and he leaned in, lowered his voice. If someone rushed this through, they're not amateurs. I walked out into sunlight that felt too clean for the dirt under my nails. I didn't have the will, I didn't have the journal, I didn't have the keys to my own past. But I had something that finally felt like leverage, a pattern. When I reached the car, a business card waited under the wiper. No logo, just 3 words stamped in black, you were warned. I tucked it beside the realtor's card, one for the show, one for the shadows. Then I started the engine, set the GPS for the one person I hadn't called in years, and said her name out loud to make it real. Ruth. Whispers of paper. The drive to Jefferson Street felt longer than the map promised. My GPS said 30 minutes, my pulse said forever. I hadn't seen Ruth in years, not since dorm rooms smelled like instant noodles and cheap perfume. Back then she was razor sharp, always one step ahead. I heard she'd turned that edge into a law degree. If anyone could untangle forged signatures and phantom corporations, it was her. The cafe hadn't changed. Same chipped brick facade, same wobbly ceiling fan spinning tired air. I spotted her in the back corner, posture perfect, black blazer that made her look untouched by time. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes marked by lines that didn't come from laughter. She looked up. For a second, her face cracked open with recognition, maybe regret, then the mask slid back on. Tamzen, she said, not a question, a verdict. Ruth, my throat caught. Thanks for meeting me. She didn't ask about the years I'd been gone. She didn't ask how many battles I'd fought. She just turned her tablet toward me. I thought you should see this. The screen glowed with a real estate listing. Address 1450 Windmere Lane, my grandfather's house, listed under Ravencrest Holdings LLC. The photo hit me hard. The porch where Grandma's hydrangeas once bloomed was stripped clean. The walls looked freshly painted, sterile. Lifeless, no trace of us. I didn't sign anything, I whispered. That's what I figured. She tapped, pulling up a property transfer filed 3 months ago. My name, Tamzen Lockach, sat on the seller's line. That's not my signature. My voice was steady, but my hands curled into fists. No, Ruth said low, it isn't, but someone wants the world to believe it is. The sounds of the cafe, cups clattering, steam hissing, faded into a hum. My body knew this feeling. Breach, compromise, enemy inside the wire. Ruth swiped again, showing a notary stamp. This belongs to a woman suspended last year for falsifying DMV affidavits, and somehow she's back, notarizing your deed transfer. My jaw tightened. They didn't just push me out, they engineered it. They moved fast, she agreed. They moved clean, and they had help. She flipped to another record. My stomach dropped at the name Brian Calloway, my sister's husband. Supply chain, right? Ruth asked. International freight, always traveling. His name appears in Ravencrest's logistics filings. The walls felt closer, so Delilah didn't just lie. She and Brian helped launder the house into a shell company. Ruth's eyes softened, but her voice didn't. And your father's name shows up too, not on the sale but on lease approvals. That makes him complicit. My breath caught. Dad, whose hand once steadied me through deployments, whose voice read bedtime stories when Mom was tired. The same man who texted me hours earlier. Things change. Why would he do this? I asked, the words scraping raw. Ruth didn't answer. She tapped the notary stamp again. We don't guess, we prove. She pulled out a yellow legal pad already filled with bullet points. Her handwriting was precise, surgical. Injunction to freeze the title, she murmured, writing as she spoke. Subpoena the notary, pull the land record chain, trace Ravencrest's ownership tree, and we'll need your grandfather's original will. Do you have a copy? I shook my head. He told me in person day before he died, but I never saw the paperwork. Then we find it, Ruth said firmly. Backups, registry scans, maybe even his old journals. Any inconsistency, timestamps, handwriting, witnesses could be enough to break this open. She leaned in, studying me. They think you'll walk away, they think you'll stay erased. They don't know me, I said, my voice was steel now. I pulled a business card from my coat pocket and slid it across the table. Plain white. 3 black words, you were warned. Ruth examined it, jaw tightening. Then they already know you're digging. I sat back, pulse steadying. For years I had turned scraps of data into weapons. Now the evidence itself was my arsenal. They stole my home on paper, I said, but I've got a pen too, and I'm not afraid to use it. Ruth tapped her pad twice like a gavel. Then we start tonight. And just like that, the war I thought I'd left overseas had a new battlefield. The house with secrets. By the time Ruth dropped me back at my car, the sun had already dipped into that bruised orange horizon that makes every street look temporary, like it could vanish if you blinked. I sat behind the wheel, notebook open, my pen tracing the words I'd scrawled earlier: utility spikes, trucks, Ravencrest. Ruth had given me homework: dig up everything I remembered about my grandfather's house, every scrap that might prove his intent to leave it to me. She promised to file an injunction the next morning. But for me, sleep wasn't on the schedule. I wasn't ready to wait for courtrooms. I needed to see it for myself. So that night I parked 2 blocks from Windmere Lane again. This time I stayed low in the seat, windows cracked, the cool air biting at my skin. From here I had a clear view of the house that once raised me. Its porch light was off now, its windows glowing a pale amber like watchful eyes. At first nothing happened. Just the quiet pulse of suburbia, crickets, the hum of a faraway TV, the occasional dog bark. I thought maybe I'd imagined the trucks. Maybe Mrs. Keating had too, maybe paranoia had finally caught me. But then, close to midnight, I heard it. The low growl of engines. 2 black trucks rolled up, headlights off, tires crunching softly on gravel. They stopped in front of the alley behind the house. My breath slowed. My hand found the small recorder in my coat pocket, muscle memory from a soldier's life. Always record, always document. 4 men climbed out, no words, just movements efficient, practiced. One of them opened the back of the truck. Crates. Not boxes for moving furniture, not suitcases. Crates. Heavy enough that 2 men grunted under their weight as they carried them toward the basement door. And there he was, Brian, my sister's husband. Baseball cap pulled low, jacket zipped high, moving with the confidence of someone who owned the night. He gestured, gave orders. The men followed. I raised the recorder, whispered the timestamp. My pulse pounded like gunfire, but my voice stayed calm. Brian Calloway, midnight. Unloading unmarked crates at 1450 Windmere. Then I saw it, the power meter on the side of the house. Its needle spiking as if something inside was guzzling electricity. Industrial load, not residential. This wasn't just fraud, this was operation. I shifted lower in my seat, heart hammering, as one of the men paused and scanned the street. His eyes swept past my car, lingered a second too long. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Finally, he turned back, hauling the crate inside. When the trucks left 20 minutes later, the alley went dark again. But the silence felt heavier now, like it carried a secret I wasn't supposed to hear. I waited until the street settled, then slipped from my car. My boots found old muscle memory, staying low, hugging shadows, every step placed with precision. I made it to the alley fence. From there, I could see the basement door locked, reinforced. I lifted my phone, snapped 3 quick photos, blurry, grainy, but proof. Then I leaned closer, ears straining. A faint hum drifted up from the basement, machinery. Not a washing machine, not a furnace, something bigger, something hidden. I backed away, every instinct screaming that I was too exposed. When I reached the car, a slip of paper was waiting under my windshield wiper. No envelope, just one line, all caps. Stop digging. My stomach turned, they knew I was watching. I drove to Ruth's apartment, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. She opened the door in sweats and a t-shirt, her blazer folded neatly on a chair behind her as if she hadn't quite shaken the armor of the day. You look like hell, she said. Then you'll believe me when I tell you this. I handed her the slip of paper, then the recorder, then showed her the photos. She scanned them fast, her jaw tightening. Industrial load, unmarked crates, intimidation notes. This isn't just property fraud, they're hiding something. And Brian's in the middle of it. She set the paper down. We'll use this, but you need to be careful. If they're willing to forge wills, they're willing to erase more than signatures. I slumped into the chair, exhaustion finally catching up. I didn't survive deployments to come home and be erased by my own family. Ruth sat across from me, her expression a mix of determination and something softer. Then don't let them. Tomorrow I'll file the injunction, but tonight you need rest. This war won't end in a week. I closed my eyes for just a moment, the sound of the humming basement still echoing in my ears, and in that darkness a truth settled cold in my chest. They hadn't just stolen a house, they were building something inside it, and whatever it was, they didn't want me to find out. Shadows in the alley. I didn't go back to the motel that night. Sleep wasn't an option. Instead, I sat in my car, engine off, notebook open, listening to the faint hum of the recorder as it replayed the sounds I'd captured. Truck doors slamming, crates thudding, Brian's voice giving orders in the dark. Every noise was evidence. Every silence was a threat. At 10:45, movement caught my eye. A man leaned against the lamp post across the street. Mid-40s, ball cap low. Jacket zipped tight. He didn't look at me, but he didn't need to. His presence was deliberate. When he walked away, I found a slip of paper wedged under my windshield wiper. One line, block letters. If you're really Tamzen, meet me at alley 9. 11 p.m. Come alone. My pulse spiked. A trap, maybe, but the soldier in me knew traps still carried information, and I needed information more than safety. At 10:59, I stepped into the alley behind Windmere Lane. The place smelled of oil and damp concrete. Chain-link fences rattled in the breeze. Recycling bins lined the walls like silent guards. He was already there, weathered face, hands rough and scarred. On his forearm, a faded tattoo of the Marine Corps insignia. I knew your grandfather, he said before I could speak. His voice was gravel, steady, unshaken. Name's Ethan. I fix cars down at McCree's garage. Been living here long enough to know when something ain't right. I studied him, cautious. What did you see? They say you're unstable, he said, eyes narrowing. Combat issues, that's what your sister's been telling the neighbors. I didn't flinch. Let them talk, tell me what you've seen. He nodded as if testing my backbone. Then he leaned in, men coming at night, vans with no plates, always black. They back into that alley, unload crates, real quiet. Always the same guy watching. Real tall, gloves on, never says a word. My stomach turned. Brian, every time, Ethan said flatly. He's running something down in that basement. Whatever it is, it ain't furniture. My recorder was already in my hand, capturing every word. Did you ever see inside the crates? Couldn't get close, but I can tell weight when I see it. Heavy. Locked. Not meant for storage, not the kind you show in open daylight. He looked past me, toward the house that loomed like a shadow at the end of the street. And the power spikes, neighbors complain their lights flicker when those trucks show up. Means heavy machinery running underground. The hum in my ears grew louder, not from the street but from the memory of that basement door. Locked, reinforced, humming like a beast caged in concrete. You need to be careful, Ethan said. These aren't folks who care about laws, they've got men watching. They see you, they'll erase you faster than a forged deed. I don't care if they care, I said. My voice was sharper than I meant it to be, but the rage had taken root. They stole my home. They buried me under lies. I won't let them bury me for real. He studied me for a long moment, then pulled something from his pocket, a small scrap of paper folded twice. He pressed it into my hand. Utility logs, I pulled them from a buddy at the power company. Look at the spikes. Consistent, always at night, always tied to that house. I opened it, scanned the numbers. He was right. Power surges like a small factory. No permits, no license. Just shadows. Why are you helping me? I asked. Because your grandfather was a good man, Ethan said. And because I know a war vet when I see one, you don't scare easy. But listen, don't go in there alone. They've got watchers, and if your father's tied to this. I stiffened. You think my father's involved? He met my eyes. I know his voice. I heard it once telling Brian to lock the alley gate. I'd know that slow, gravel drawl anywhere. The ground tilted beneath me, Dad. My anchor, my compass. His voice, the same voice that read me bedtime stories, the same voice that told me things change in a text just yesterday, was giving orders in the dark. I backed away, recorder still running, hand tight around the slip of paper. I need to see it myself, I said. That's not smart, Ethan warned. Neither is living erased. The alley was darker when I left, as if the night had swallowed more than shadows. My chest felt tight. My breath short, but my purpose clear. They weren't just thieves. They weren't just liars. They were running something in that basement, and now I had proof that my father was part of it. I walked back to my car, slipped the recorder into my pocket, and whispered into the silence, more to myself than to anyone else. This isn't family anymore. This is war. Episode 6, The Father's Voice. The night after Ethan's warning, I couldn't stay away. His words looped in my head. I know his voice. It was impossible, unthinkable, and yet the truth rang louder than denial. If my father was part of this, I needed to hear it myself. So I dressed in black. Jacket zipped high, camera clipped to my collar, recorder in my pocket. My boots carried me back to the alley behind Windmere Lane, every step steady. Like muscle memory from old missions. The kind of walk you use when you're not sure if you're coming back. The air was brittle with cold, smelling of oil and damp leaves. I crouched low behind a half-burned fence panel, eyes locked on the basement door. Midnight came and went in silence. Then at 12:30 the low growl of engines rolled in. 2 black trucks, lights off, tires crunching soft against gravel. I pressed record. 4 men climbed out, moving with the same wordless efficiency I'd seen before. One of them, Brian, baseball cap, gloves, confidence. He gestured toward the door like he owned the place. They unloaded crates again, heavy, locked, carried down into the humming dark. I shifted, keeping low, heart slamming hard but steady. My camera caught their faces, their movements. I whispered timestamps into the mic. Then I found it, a vent along the foundation, half-rusted, just wide enough to slip my recorder through. I wedged it there, praying the mic would pick up whatever secrets echoed below. For minutes, only the thud of crates, the scrape of metal, then voices. If the officer finds out, one man started. Another voice cut in, slow, gravel-lined, deliberate, a voice I had known my entire life. Then sever the tie, my blood froze. I pressed closer to the vent, breath caught in my throat. It wasn't Brian. It wasn't a stranger. It was my father. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who coached my science projects, who stood tall at my promotion ceremony. The man who told me things change in a text. And now here he was, buried in shadows, giving orders to cover crimes. I wanted to scream, to rip the vent open and demand answers, but training won out. I stayed still. Document. Don't interfere. Proof first, pain later. I let the recorder run until the meeting broke apart, until boots thudded up the stairs and the trucks rolled away into silence. Then I crept back to the vent, hands shaking as I reached for the recorder. Gone. The space was empty, clean, as if it had never been there. My chest tightened. That told me 2 things. They knew I was watching, and they were watching back. I stumbled back to the car, adrenaline burning out of me like acid. I slammed the door, stared at the dark windshield, and forced my voice steady for the camera. I heard him, my father, Richard Lockach. He gave the order, sever the tie. The words felt like glass in my mouth. When I reached my apartment, dawn was already bleeding into the sky. I dropped into the chair at my desk, powered up my laptop, and pulled the encrypted drives from my safe. Emails, scanned deeds, call logs, every scrap I'd ever saved. Tonight, they weren't souvenirs of paranoia. They were ammunition. I plugged in the recorder's backup feed. Thank God I'd rigged it to auto-sync to my phone. The audio played grainy but clear. Sever the tie. I replayed it 10 times. The cadence never changed. My father's voice, carrying the authority of boardrooms and battlefields alike. A voice people trusted, a voice I loved. Now it was evidence. I sent the file to Ruth with a single message, it's him. Then another to Isaac, a cybersecurity analyst I hadn't spoken to in years. Need your skills. Urgent, classified level stakes. His reply came in 6 minutes. Pull everything. Start building the chain. Don't wait. By morning, my apartment had become a war room. 2 laptops, 3 drives, encrypted servers humming like a hive. The same discipline that once mapped terrorist networks now mapped my own family's betrayal. And at the center of it all was my father's voice. Not cheering me on, not guiding me home, commanding the cover-up of a crime that could erase me for good. The digital war room. By sunrise, my apartment no longer looked like a home. It looked like a bunker. 2 laptops open, a third booting up, drives stacked like ammunition, cables spilling across the floor like veins. The glow of monitors painted the room in cold blue, the kind of light I knew from briefing cells overseas. Only this time the battlefield wasn't a desert or a server farm in some hidden compound. It was my family's house. I'd sent the audio file to Ruth and Isaac hours earlier. Ruth replied with one word, confirmed. Isaac's response came minutes later. Let's map the rot. Send everything, so I did. Property filings, utility logs. Ethan had handed me scans of my grandfather's will, even old emails my father had sent years ago about estate planning. I dumped it all into an encrypted folder and handed Isaac the key. At 8:03 my laptop pinged. A private call. I answered. Ruth appeared on the screen, hair pinned back, blazer already on like she hadn't slept. Her voice was calm but carried that edge she saved for courtroom battles. We have enough to file an injunction, she said, flipping through notes. But the voice recording, that's our nuclear option. If a judge hears your father giving orders, it changes everything. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. The thought of playing his voice in court felt like loading a bullet into a gun aimed at my own chest. Another ping. Isaac joined the call. His camera stayed dark, just a shadow outline. Got your packet, he said, his voice fast, clipped like always. Nice encryption. Took me longer to unpack it than it should have. Means you're still sharp. I wasn't trying to impress you, I muttered. You did anyway. He chuckled once dry. All right, here's what I've got. Ravencrest isn't a company, it's a shell. No real employees, no real offices, just a P.O. box in Delaware and a cascade of offshore accounts. He shared his screen, a map unfolded, lines, arrows, nodes connected like a spiderweb of lies. At the center, Ravencrest Holdings LLC. Branching off, Brian's logistics firm, Delilah's personal bank account. And at the top, one name stamped like a brand, Richard Lockach, my father. I leaned closer. So he's not just complicit, he authorized it. Signed contracts himself, Isaac confirmed. Storage leases, wire transfers, even government subcontracts funneled through Ravencrest. Ruth's eyes narrowed. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, this isn't just civil court material. It's federal, exactly, Isaac said. And whoever's behind the offshore accounts, they're moving serious money, midnight transfers, 7 figures, not something you hide unless it's dirty. My pulse hammered. They used my name on those contracts too, didn't they? Isaac tapped a line on the map. Yep, forged signatures on at least 3 filings. Someone inside had access to your clearance records. They used your military ID codes to win federal contracts they never qualified for. The air sucked out of the room. I had faced enemies overseas who would have killed for access to those codes. Now my own family had weaponized them. They didn't just erase you, Ruth said quietly. They exploited you. For a moment, silence hung between us. My father's voice echoed in my head, sever the tie. I realized now what he meant. Cut me out, erase me. Strip me of any legal foothold. I wasn't supposed to exist in their story anymore. But I did, and I had proof. What's our next move? I asked. Ruth leaned forward. We file tomorrow, injunction to freeze all property transfers tied to Windmere Lane. Subpoena the notary, start pulling witnesses. Ethan can testify about what he saw. The utility logs are corroboration. And the audio? She hesitated. We hold it. Drop it too soon and they'll know exactly how close we are. For now, it's leverage. Isaac spoke again, voice hard. I'll keep tracing the money, but listen, if they've got access to your psych file like that text implied, they'll use it. They'll paint you unstable. They'll try to burn you down before you reach court. I've been evaluated a dozen times, I said. Every deployment, every clearance renewal, they won't find cracks. You underestimate lawyers like Brian's, Ruth warned. They'll twist silence into confession if you let them. I clenched my fists, nails biting my palms. Then I won't be silent. Isaac's map shifted, zooming into a cluster of red nodes. One more thing, these offshore wires, they're timed right after the power spikes in the house. Whatever's running in that basement, it's not just storage. It's generating revenue, big revenue. The words tasted like metal. So the house isn't just stolen, it's being used as cover for something illegal. Exactly. Ruth exhaled slowly, rubbing her temple. All right, tonight get some rest, tomorrow we make this official. But when the call ended and the screens went dark, rest was the last thing on my mind. I sat in the silence of the war room, surrounded by humming drives and flickering monitors, staring at the spiderweb map. At the center was Ravencrest. At the edges, Brian and Delilah, and threaded through it all, my father's signature. I whispered to the empty room. They thought they could sever the tie, but they forgot I know how to fight in the dark. The courtroom clash. The courthouse didn't smell like justice. It smelled like dust, old carpet, and coffee burnt 3 hours too long. But when I walked into that room in full uniform, metal sharp against my chest, the air shifted. Veterans know the weight of presence, and today, presence mattered more than weapons. Ruth slid into the chair beside me, files stacked like ammunition at her elbow. Across the aisle, Delilah sat stiff, eyes fixed on the table. Her hands twisted a tissue to shreds. Brian, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair with that same smirk I'd seen in the doorway until the judge entered. Then his expression snapped into a mask of bored respect. My father wasn't there yet. Part of me hoped he wouldn't come. Part of me needed him to. All rise, the bailiff called. We did. The judge, a woman with silver hair and eyes sharp enough to cut marble, took her seat. Case 23-1475. Lockach versus Lockach et al. Counsel proceed. Ruth rose. Her voice was calm, measured, lethal. Your Honor, we present evidence that my client, Lieutenant Colonel Tamzen Lockach, was unlawfully erased from property and estate records through forged documents, fraudulent transfers, and the use of her military clearance codes in government contracts she did not authorize. The judge raised a brow. That's a serious claim. Ruth didn't flinch. So is forging a dead man's will. A ripple moved through the gallery. Delilah's shoulders stiffened. Brian's jaw ticked. Ruth handed over the first exhibit, the forged deed with my name scrawled across the cellar line. This is not my client's signature. Forensic analysis confirms inconsistencies with known samples. The notary attached to this transfer was suspended for falsification last year. The judge scanned the page, her expression unreadable. Next, Ruth said, sliding utility logs across. Power usage at 1450 Windmere Lane. Spikes consistent with industrial machinery. No permits filed, no renovations recorded. This suggests unlicensed operations in a residential property. Brian shifted, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. Delilah stared at the table like it might swallow her whole. Ruth wasn't done. She tapped her tablet, and the courtroom speakers crackled to life. If the officer finds out, then the voice, gravel, slow, unmistakable. Sever the tie. I didn't breathe, neither did anyone else. The judge's eyes flicked up, sharp. Who is that voice? My father, I said, standing back straight. Richard Lockach. The room stirred, Delilah's tissue tore in two, Brian's mask slipped for half a second, and then the doors opened. He walked in, my father, suit pressed, tie perfect, posture as straight as it had been my whole childhood. He didn't look at me. He sat beside Brian and folded his hands like this was just another board meeting. The judge's gaze pinned him. Mr. Lockach, you are implicated in these recordings. Do you have counsel present? His lawyer, a polished man with slick hair, rose. We contest the authenticity of that tape. It could be doctored. My client never. Ruth cut in, voice steel. Metadata confirms timestamp integrity. Location matches the property. Witness testimony corroborates late-night activity. She gestured toward the gallery, where Ethan sat in the back row, marine tattoo peeking from under his sleeve. He nodded once, solid as bedrock. The judge leaned back. We'll allow further forensic review, but at face value this raises grave concerns. Brian couldn't help himself. This is a witch hunt. She's unstable. Everyone knows it. Ruth snapped around. Then explained the forged signatures, the offshore transfers, the use of a suspended notary. She slammed a folder onto the table. And explain why your name, Mr. Calloway, appears on Ravencrest's wire logs, 7 figures moved at midnight, tied directly to your logistics firm. His smirk was gone now, replaced by a clenched jaw. The judge's gavel struck once. Enough, this court will not tolerate theatrics. Evidence will decide, not insults. I sat back down, chest tight, but for the first time in weeks I felt it, the tide shifting. Not in whispers, not in shadows, but in the light of process. My father still wouldn't look at me. He stared straight ahead as if ignoring me would erase me all over again. But it was too late. His voice was on record. His name was on contracts. His silence was louder than my accusations. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt since stepping off that cab weeks ago. Power. Because for the first time, they weren't writing the story. I was. Judgment Day. The courthouse was quieter on the day of judgment, but the silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat at the plaintiff's table in full uniform again, back straight, ribbons polished until they caught the fluorescent light. I didn't wear them for the judge or for the gallery or even for Ruth. I wore them for me. To remind myself that no matter what they tried to erase, I had earned this skin, this name, this place. Ruth sat beside me, files stacked neatly, calm as ever. Across the aisle, Delilah twisted her fingers into knots. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering in rapid bursts she barely seemed to hear. Brian tapped his foot, jaw tight, that smug veneer cracked into impatience. And my father, Richard Lockach, sat stone still, eyes fixed forward, the same way he'd stared at boardroom slides my whole childhood. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Everyone sat, and then it began. This court has reviewed extensive documentation, testimony, and forensic evidence, the judge said, her voice carrying across the chamber like steel wrapped in velvet. The question before us, whether the defendants engaged in conspiracy, fraud, and forgery to unlawfully seize property and financial assets belonging to Lieutenant Colonel Tamzen Lockach. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The judge shuffled papers, eyes scanning the bench. The deed transfer was notarized by an individual previously suspended for falsification. The signature attributed to the plaintiff does not match verified samples. Utility records confirm abnormal spikes consistent with unauthorized industrial use. Wire logs and corporate filings trace a direct path from Ravencrest Holdings to the defendant's personal and business accounts. Delilah's lawyer rose. Your Honor, we contest the admissibility. The gavel cracked once. Sit down, your contest has been noted and dismissed. The gallery stirred. Veterans in faded jackets shifted in their seats, eyes on me. I felt their presence like a quiet wall at my back. The judge continued. Most damning, however, is the audio recording authenticated by independent forensic review. It clearly captures the voice of Richard Lockach, directing concealment of operations tied to the disputed property. The court finds this evidence credible. For the first time, my father's jaw twitched. He still didn't look at me. Therefore, the judge said, her voice ringing final, this court rules. Defendant Delilah Thatcher, 6 years imprisonment for conspiracy and fraud. Defendant Brian Calloway, 10 years imprisonment for wire fraud, forgery, and contract abuse. Defendant Richard Lockach, 10 years imprisonment for conspiracy, forgery, and federal contract violations. The gavel struck twice. The sound was heavier than thunder. Delilah broke first. Her sob cracked through the chamber, muffled by her lawyer's frantic hand on her shoulder. Brian swore under his breath, fists clenched, his mask finally shattered. And my father stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor, as if the weight of shame might crush him if he met my gaze. The bailiffs moved in, firm hands guiding them up, shackles clicking like punctuation marks at the end of a long, ugly sentence. Reporters outside would later say it was anticlimactic, that there were no outbursts, no dramatic collapses. But they were wrong. The collapse was there. You could feel it in the way Delilah's shoulders caved, in the way Brian stopped smirking, in the way my father finally seemed smaller than I'd ever known him. The court adjourned. The gallery rose. Veterans nodded at me as I passed, men with canes, women in faded uniforms, faces lined by time but eyes bright with quiet respect. One reached out, his grip firm. "Colonel," he said softly, "you reminded them we still stand." I nodded, my throat tight. "We don't stay erased." Outside, cameras flashed, microphones angled forward. Questions flew like bullets. "How do you feel? What comes next? Do you forgive them?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken, louder than any words I could offer. When I finally reached the steps, I paused, turned back to the courthouse looming behind me. For weeks, it had felt like a battlefield. Now it was just a building. The war inside was over. Not because I won land or money, but because I won back something they could never forge or steal: my name. What remains? The courthouse steps emptied slower than they filled. Reporters peeled away first, chasing faster stories. Lawyers drifted to phones and parking garages. Veterans lingered longest, their nods heavy with meaning. And then it was just me standing in the quiet that always follows war. For weeks my life had been noise, arguments, evidence, lies unraveling, truths revealed. Now silence pressed down like fresh snow. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like aftermath. Ruth walked beside me, her briefcase clasped like a weapon she no longer needed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The injunction had become a conviction. The papers had become sentences. The voices that once erased me had been forced to answer for themselves. And yet when I closed my eyes, I still heard my father's voice. Not the gravel drawl from the basement, ordering concealment, but the softer one, the man who taught me chess on rainy afternoons, who drilled me on spelling lists, who hugged me too tight before my first deployment. Both voices belonged to him. Both voices lived in me now. That night, I didn't drive to the motel. I drove to Windmere Lane. The house loomed at the end of the block, its windows dark, its porch stripped bare. The hydrangeas were gone, the sign still crooked on the lawn, for sale. Except now, no one could sell it. The county had frozen every document tied to it. The house was mine again, at least on paper. But standing there, I realized paper wasn't enough. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching under my boots, and walked up the path. The porch boards groaned like they remembered me. My hand touched the railing where Grandpa once leaned, flashlight blinking Morse code into the night sky. For the first time in years, I let myself feel it, not anger, not loss, but grief. Grief for the family dinners that would never happen again. Grief for the sister who chose greed over blood. Grief for a father who traded honor for silence. Inside, the house was hollow. Furniture gone, walls scrubbed, every trace of us erased. But in the corner of the living room, under a patch of wallpaper too stubborn to peel, I found something. A scribble, my handwriting. I'd carved it there when I was 10, hiding from chores. Tamzen was here. I pressed my hand against it. The letters rough under my fingers, and for the first time since this war began, I smiled. They had tried to erase me with forged ink, with legal lies, with shadows in the night. But I had left my mark long before their schemes, and some marks don't fade. When I left the house, I locked the door behind me, not because I wanted to keep others out, but because I wanted to keep something in: memory, resilience, the truth of where I came from. Weeks later, I visited the Defense Services Library. The air smelled of polished stone and quiet reverence. On the wall of honor, names were carved into black granite. Mine among them. Colonel Tamzen Lockach. Cyber Command 998-2023. I traced the letters with my fingers. No court, no forgery, no father's voice could strip that away. What remained wasn't revenge. What remained wasn't land or money. What remained was identity. I walked out into the sunlight, the world noisy again with traffic and footsteps, but inside I was quiet, steady, because they had stolen papers, signatures, even memories, but they hadn't stolen me. And that in the end was what remained. The silence that holds. The months that followed felt quieter than I expected. No more midnight stakeouts. No more forged deeds to chase, no crates rolling into basements. Just mornings with coffee, afternoons with paperwork, and evenings where silence no longer felt like an enemy. Ruth checked in often, always professional, always steady. Her legal victories became headlines in niche law journals, the kind that praised precision over drama. Isaac sent me encrypted updates about the offshore accounts. Every week another shell company dissolved under federal scrutiny. Ethan stopped by the cafe once, nodding at me across the room before slipping out without a word. We didn't need words. Warfighters rarely do. The house on Windmere Lane stood empty through the winter. Snow blanketed the roof, erasing its sharp edges. Neighbors whispered, some calling it cursed, others saying it was finally at peace. I drove by sometimes, never stopping, just watching the frost cling to the windows where I once taped glow-in-the-dark stars. It wasn't mine to live in anymore. It was mine in a deeper way, through truth, through memory, through the fight it took to reclaim it. One evening in early spring, I stood outside the courthouse again, this time not as a plaintiff but as a witness to another case. A younger veteran approached me, ribbons faded, cane steady. He looked at me the way soldiers look at each other when words fail. You reminded us, he said softly. We don't let them erase us. I nodded. His words weren't praise, they were solidarity. A vow that what we fight for isn't just land or contracts or houses. It's the right to exist, to be seen, to have our names carved into stone where no one can scratch them out. At night, I sometimes replayed the recording in my head. My father's voice, sever the tie. But the memory no longer cut me open. It hardened into a scar, something visible, undeniable, but no longer bleeding. Because the tie wasn't severed. Not really. Blood may betray, family may fracture, but truth remains. And truth is a stronger tether than any forged signature. I learned that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it moves like paper across a clerk's desk or the steady voice of a judge reading a verdict. Justice isn't flashy. It's patient. It's deliberate, and it's unshakable once it arrives. In the end, I didn't walk away with wealth. I didn't walk away with a house restored to its former glow. I walked away with something far more powerful, the knowledge that they tried to erase me and failed. That's what I want anyone listening to remember. When they try to silence you, write louder. When they try to erase you, carve deeper. When they tell you you don't belong, stand so tall that even their lies can't cover your shadow. Because revenge fades, money fades, even families sometimes fade. But identity, who you are, what you've stood for, the truth you carry, endures. And in the silence that followed this war, I found something worth more than any inheritance. I found myself.